Good morning and welcome to Sales Stories with Nate Teske. Rob Sullivan is on with me today, and we are looking forward to a discussion with one of my former colleagues, Donna Walker. And she and I worked together for almost 12 or 13 years, I think it was. And collectively on our call today, we have 100 years of professional sales experience. So, really looking forward to the discussion this morning.
Morning, Nate. Good to
Morning,
see you.
Rob. Good to see you. Good morning,
Morning.
Donna.
Good morning.
Thank you for making time for us here this morning. And looking forward to hearing your sales stories, Donna. I know you and I have a lot that we've shared during the time we worked together, and really looking forward to your top sales stories and lessons learned and things that other folks that may be newer into sales or even have been in sales for a while will benefit from. So thank you for joining us this morning.
Well, you're very welcome.
So Donna, as we start, I'd like to hear, either your best sales story or your favorite sales story, or maybe one that was pretty challenging, maybe that you won or maybe that you lost, that you learned a lot of things from, and start the discussion with that.
Sounds very good. And actually, it's a fairly recent sales story, and it happened just a year ago, right about this time. And it's a great sales story for me because it really demonstrates that sales is really, it's not an individual sport. It's definitely a team sport. And this was one of those sales where it was just, I kind of felt like I was the conductor, and it was just the perfect orchestra in terms of the start all the way through the conclusion of that sales cycle. And to give you a little bit of background on it, so last year in the March timeframe, we had some of our technical engineers, our computer scientists attend one of the technical conferences that we attend every year. And the business that I'm in right now it's all about Java. So different Java-based solutions for the marketplace, one of which is just a very technical solution that a lot of Java experts, a lot of engineers within organizations utilize and evaluate. So we went to a conference. Our CTO spoke. We have development relations folks, and they actually spoke with one of these folks that was a senior engineer from a trading organization, high frequency trading organization in downtown Chicago. He had been aware of our organization. He had kind of followed our organization for probably the better part of about 10 years, but they had a lot of good conversations during that conference. And before the conference was actually even over, I had an on-site scheduled with him the next week in Chicago, along with one of my development relations folks. And we just had a really great meeting on site. We agreed to do a pilot so that they could really test our software and see how it works specifically in their environment. A lot of learnings for me, because this was really one of the very first large trading organizations that I had worked with. My company has a lot of financial services, a lot of trading organizations that come to us. And the reason why they do is because we've got a product that can actually just drop in our Java runtime, replace the current OpenJDK that they're using, and get about a 20 to 25% performance improvement, which if you think about in a high frequency trading environment, that's huge. And it's also a very easy drop-in, very easy to pilot, very easy to see the results. And we were specifically working with this sponsor. There were about 50 people that were a part of the team that he was on, and they were on a team called the strategy layer. And what that meant within their organization is they were actually the ones that developed the sophisticated pricing algorithms that went into then how the trading engineers determined those various trades that they would do. And the reason why our product was so important is particularly if you think about the market last year in the March, April, May timeframe, incredibly volatile, which isn't necessarily great for us as individual investors, but it's fantastic when you're a trading organization and you're buying and selling, and that's your profit and you're living on those margins. So we just had the right product at the right timing for that organization. And I think a few other reasons why it was such a great deal is because not only did we have, them on their side, and they were very, very eager to work with us. It really felt like more of one team than two different teams going through an evaluation. I think they really wanted to see this work because this was their product. This was their own internal product, their pricing algorithms that went out to their senior trading engineers who actually performed and executed those trades. So they were able to basically help not only the traders, but help the entire organization from a profitability perspective. And overall, we scheduled the pilot, we scheduled the paperwork kind of in tandem and in process. So from start to finish, from the start of that conference to when we signed a 7-figure deal, it was just over 3 months. And that had never been done before in our organization. And the CEO was kind of surprised in terms of, he's like, wow. He goes, when you told me that you were going to do this and you were going to close this in a matter of 3 months, he goes, I really kind of thought you were crazy. And I was like, nope, it's something that I think all senior sales folks have done time after time in their career. It takes the discipline. It takes, putting together those mutual action plans. It makes, you make sure that you're working on the technical evaluation at the same time in parallel. You're working with procurement. You're working on the paperwork side. And I had such a great team on both sides that really I could kind of sit back and orchestrate and be that coach and just see everything come together really, really well. And so it was just a fantastic win for both of our organizations. And in fact, I was working with them just this week.
Good. Well, that says a lot about you because I worked at a proprietary options trading firm based in the Mercantile Exchange. And one thing I know with absolute certainty is traders do not take risks. So if they're going to enter into a 7-figure agreement with you within a 3-month period, that says that you did an amazing job of giving them peace of mind.
Well, thank you. And you're right. I think it's all about, no matter what business that you're in, it's always about the risk mitigation, risk management. And we were able to very quickly through this pilot, not only show how well it worked in the non-production environment, but they had such sophisticated engineers that they were able to very quickly put it into their production environments. They had all of their key benchmarking in terms of all their reports, and they could very easily see a 20 to 25% improvement in terms of reduced latency, increased amount of transactions in that same time frame. So it really was a great win, a great ROI for them, as well as for our company.
So Donna, that's an awesome story and good for you for 3 months because that's very hard to do. I mean, when you talk about not only it being a 7-figure deal, because the numbers are the numbers, whatever, right? But you obviously had a very solid business case as you were going through that. So were you working with like the CIO, the chief information officer, or were you working with like a director, or who was kind of your main contact and your champ, so to speak, in that exercise?
Yeah, and this might surprise both of you because it was a little bit different. And this was a learning that I found, oftentimes in all of the businesses that I've worked for, I'm working with some of those C-level executives, or at least we've got sponsorship up to those C levels. But in this case, it was really that senior engineer who had been there for 27 years. He actually had the longest longevity of anyone in the organization. He was very well respected, well regarded. He was on a team of 50 other engineers in Chicago, headed by a gentleman that ran that strategy layer. And again, this was their mousetrap. We could very easily improve on that mousetrap, which is hard to do because these guys, they're known for their technology. They're known for their innovation. They've got very, very smart people. But if you can just do one little tweak and drop in a Java runtime that's an optimized, highly efficient one, it can improve even what they felt were the best processes that they had there. And so I think that was, part of the overall success.
I'm curious what objections you ran into during that 3-month process.
You know, And that's a really good question as well, because in terms of the objections, one of the things that we did strategically, when you do a pilot, mileage is going to vary. So we tested our solution on different systems that they had throughout their trading organization. Trading organizations, as most everyone knows, they're really on-prem. They're really Java-based applications. They want to be close to the exchanges of where they do business at, et cetera. And so really the objections were just that we had one pilot that really didn't necessarily show those same results of 20 to 25%. They had some different key performance indicators for that. And frankly, for that other pilot, they didn't really know which of those key performance indicators were the most important for them, because software can look differently and be tweaked differently depending upon what's most important. So the objections were really just, we had a few pilots that went incredibly well. We had one that maybe didn't go as well, but overall we developed the confidence for them and us and in the product, and they saw enough of a gain and ROI that they moved forward with us. The other challenge I would say, and the other person that I worked with very directly throughout the entire time frame, was their head of procurement globally. So again, going back, Nate, to your question in terms of who are you working with? At a trading organization, I learned that this company is incredibly flat, very, very flat. And it was really working with the strategy team. They were the ones that wanted to deploy our tool throughout their organization, and procurement, who in the background was working with the CFO and others across their global entity to make sure that this was something that they wanted to deploy globally. Procurement was a little bit difficult. She was just, as all procurement folks do, trying to get the best deal for their company. So the tables are a little bit different now with the renewal because we've got everything spelled out in the contract. And but again, I think we're doing really well in terms of both of our organizations together. But this was one where, again, I learned that very flat organization. They said, Donna, these are the things that you need to do in order to win this deal. I had to trust them. I did, and we got it done.
That one question I have. So your pilot, how long time-wise did it take?
And that's a really good question. Typically, our prime pilots, prime is the product, if you will. Typically, our prime pilots can actually last 6 months, 9 months. It depends upon the organization. It depends upon the people within that organization and how they prioritize this pilot in addition to their day job. And so what we did differently here is one of the things that procurement wanted to do, something that I'm seeing more and more with some of our products do pilots, some of them don't, but I try to give them paperwork, basically like a $0 order form, where they have a condensed time frame for the pilot. And that way, both organizations prioritize, focus on that timeline, and in parallel, then we work on the paperwork side. So this was an example where we got a much larger deal in a much shorter time frame. Sometimes organizations will buy a smaller amount of software, test it out, and then kind of expand from there. And we did it differently, where we said, let's do it all up front, and that's what we were able to accomplish.
So you mentioned that it's a very flat organization. How many stakeholders did you end up interacting with, and what departments are we talking about? You mentioned procurement, you mentioned the engineer. Who else?
There were probably fewer than 10 people that ultimately that we worked with, besides the head of procurement, besides that sponsor that was part of the strategy layer. We worked with probably another 7, 8 engineers within that strategy organization when we tested the different solutions that they had as part of the pilot. We also had 1 or 2 of the trading engineers as a part of this process, because obviously they're the ones that are going to be executing on the trades and want to make sure that this highly optimized JDK does in fact provide the additional performance, the reduced latency versus what they were currently using.
So was it an all or nothing in terms of it had to work with all of the different pilot groups that you worked with?
Yeah, it really wasn't. And that was one of the things that we've kind of learned within our organization to do when we have Prime and we pilot that. We try to pilot it with several different solutions, products, applications that are Java based, because the mileage does vary, just like what we saw at this organization. And a lot of it has to do with just the infrastructure that they have, what they have in place. And so it's really key for our business to make sure that we're testing on multiple different applications or systems so that we can show and prove that value in some of them. They have different hardware throughout this trading organization. So our solution worked better with certain hardware that they had than others. But these were the key areas for them in terms of where they needed our solution.
And Donna, we've had some conversations with some sales folks that some pilots were paid, some were not paid by the customer where they had funds involved. Was there a fee structure to the pilot, or is it, hey, this is what we're doing it for a month or whatever the time frame is, and then at the end we're going to make the decision. So that was my first question. I had another question about the contract piece, but I want to get your feedback on that, if it was paid or not.
Sure. And actually within our organization, and again, I think this is just the philosophy of our organization, pilots are free. Pilots are at a no cost. We want to make sure that we allow an organization to pilot the product. We've got three main products, and really only one has a pilot. The others you can really kind of demonstrate value over just talking, and kind of similar to what we did, Nate, when we were over at Rimini Street. That you don't really need to have demonstrations and things like that. So the
Okay.
way that it's always been structured within our organization is that pilots are at no cost, but I think we're doing a better job as of the last year where we're really qualifying and making sure that before we jump into a pilot, because they're invaluable for us, but they take a lot of time and resources, et cetera, we make sure that they are qualified. So we kind of go through a process to ensure that all of the resources that are going to be involved in the pilot, they know exactly what the goals, the objectives are. The customer is in agreement and alignment with those.
And I'm curious too, so from that 3 month window from the time you met him at that show, at what point did you send them an actual contract to have procurement start reviewing?
I would probably say about halfway into it. I would say within the first 3 or 4 weeks, procurement came and said, you know what, before we actually test this and pilot this in production, we were already piloted in non-production. She
Mhm.
said, I want to have something between our organizations. And in this case, it was really just an email that the CRO sent out, and that was sufficient enough for them to know that they could go ahead and use this in a production environment. But it was my leverage. I used that to say to myself, okay, she needs this. This is something that they need. Let's get something back on the other side. And that was a June 30th deadline on it. And so that's kind of how we crafted that. And that became the plan of which we moved toward through, not only the paperwork side, but also on the technical side.
I want to come back to that whole idea of charging versus doing the pilot on
Sure.
a test basis. At what point would you shift and realize this is something we really should be charging for?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And being in sales for my entire career, I always, if we're providing value, it's great to obviously be able to charge a customer, and sometimes when they've got skin in the game, then you've got the prioritization, you've got the focus, and you've got everybody, moving in the same direction. Our organization, just for various reasons, they want, and this is, I think, the philosophy at the top with our CEO and our CTO, who are founders and technologists. We just do these at no cost. Would I potentially do things a little bit differently? I would, or I would say, okay, the pilots have to be X amount of time, and if we want to go beyond that, then we've got to maybe kind of reevaluate things. I think that the more process, the more specificity that you have moving into a pilot, more alignment on both the customer side as well as on our side, the better the overall results are going to be. And we've had those pilots that have kind of dragged on and not come to a conclusion. But I really learned within my organization that this really worked successfully last year. And so every other pilot that I've done since then, I've kind of had that same creativity, if you will. It's like, let me send you something that tells you that you've got the ability to use the software for this time frame in a pilot scenario. And again, it just helps give us the framework on the timeline.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. And one thing I know that you do very well, Donna, just from when we work together, is that transition timeline or the engagement timeline you have with the customer. When you time box that, they know, hey, we got to get this done in 4 weeks or whatever it is. And it sounds like you guys have done enough of them where you can control that process. And in 4 weeks or whatever the time frame was that you actually did the trial or the pilot, in that window, they were all in. It sounded like from an engagement standpoint. One question I have regarding that: did you work with the actual traders themselves at the firm? I know they were using some of the product behind the scenes, but did you work with the actual users of the system?
The team that we worked with, which is called kind of the strategy layer, the execution layer is actually those trading engineers. We had a couple of trading engineers on various cadence calls that we had weekly with the multiple pilots that we had ongoing. So they were a little bit more in the background, but our team that we were engaged with were working very closely with them because obviously they kind of had to, turn things on, if you will, because it was really that easy. Turn things on so that they could use it in the production environment, look at reports side by side, and see what those different results were. So hopefully that answers your question a bit.
Yeah, because I know I have a couple of buddies that work downtown in downtown Chicago at the Board of Trade, and they're on the floor, right?
Oh,
And
sure.
when you talked about volatility, my one friend, he was telling me the year he made the most money was 2008. And remember the chaos of 2008, right? And he told me, he said, Nate, he said, when there's chaos and everyone's freaking out, he goes, I make the most money. Like you and I on the regular day to day, we were all down, right? But when there's chaos and frenzy like that, he said that's when they make their money and people are actively trading. So that's pretty interesting. So you work with the you said the trading engineers. So they were kind of like in your and my world, the sales engineers, right? Or the solution architects or whatever.
Yeah, they really were, and they were a very specific group. The gentleman that runs the strategy layer, I think it's a team of about 65 with about 50 of them sitting physically in Chicago in cubicles. So they work very, very, very closely together with one another. Very, very smart individuals and very dedicated to this product and project, I should say. And so I think that's another reason for the success of it.
And one more thing that you said too, you work with I think you said he was a senior engineer, just a very tenured guy, and then the head of procurement. It's interesting because I know you've been in these situations. I definitely have, where I remember working on a deal years ago where I was working with a senior manager. It was $1 million contract, and management was freaking out. We got to get to the CIO, and I'm like, hey, this guy said he's going to get it done. I trust him, right? You go with your gut, Donna. And someone in management went to the CIO behind my back and I didn't know it. And this guy called me and he was one of those hair trigger people. And he starts going off on me and he's like, why did you guys reach out? Why did you reach out to my CIO? I'm like, hold on. I said, what are you talking about? I didn't even know that they called him. So I found out who it was and I kind of back channel. I'm like, hey, I said, don't do that again because this guy basically, and from that point on, it was in some ways, initially I was like, WTF, right? But in some ways it lit a fire with this guy because then he was like, okay, I'm the guy. He had a little bit of that chip on his shoulder, which it ended up working out well. We got the contract and such. But it's funny because you kind of get a sniff of a deal sometimes where the general, C-level executive that you're supposed to work with, I don't want to minimize your deal that you did, but maybe in the grand scheme, it was only $1 million in financial services firms, right? And trading firms, they don't care about $1 million in the grand scheme, right? If it's going to help them with their business, and the people underneath say, yep, let's get it. It's like you and I buying a box of donuts, right? It doesn't matter. So good for you on controlling that. Did you have a challenge management wise where they were like, hey, why are we not talking to, XYZ executives? Or did they trust that you were with the right people?
Yeah, one of the things that I really do like about my current company, and I've been here for about 3.5 years, is that they really trust me. And so I provide updates to senior leadership. I report directly to the CRO, but they ask me questions. They don't get involved unless I ask them to get involved. And of course, if I ask them, they're more than happy to do that. I did introduce the CRO to the head of procurement toward the end of the cycle, but she made it very clear and she slapped my hand a couple of times for bringing the other person into some of our conversations, meaning that senior Java engineer, because we were talking about some technical issues as a part of the contract. And she made it very clear that, Donna, to get this done, you've got to work with me, not around me, not through me. And so after I had gotten my hand slapped once or twice, I definitely trusted that from that point forward. So
I'm curious too. You said it was a challenging contract review. So with what you can share, obviously, like what were some of the hangups that she had, or was she just your typical kind of, I'm getting the best deal procurement person? Was there anything that like stood out from what she did, either in the negotiations or contract wise, that was like, I don't know, that you remember?
Yeah, it was, it was kind of interesting because sometimes she seemed to be more of a friend with our organization and with me and with kind of those interactions. And we were actually very fortunate. We were invited to their holiday party with some of the largest vendors that they work with. And the head of the strategy layer spent the whole evening with us. So we were considered to be a very important vendor, which I thought was tremendous. And she was, you know, came up, hugged me and everything else. But the next day we're working on renewals and there were a couple of points that she wasn't necessarily happy with. So just, I think, I think it kind of just boils down to just trying to provide the best customer service you can possibly provide. And the other thing that I think we all have to do or should do as sales folks is just make sure that everything is, your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed. The contract was very clear in terms of quantities of the product, pricing of the product. And for this renewal that we're going through right now, she wanted to make some changes, but we really had that all specified very clearly within the contract. So take the time to do that up front so that downstream it makes it easier for everybody in terms of moving forward.
Yeah, I'm curious about the relationship with her because it's always fascinating to me. Procurement people act like it's all them and it's their decision, but the reality is, I mean, I know traders. I worked with them for a while. If a trader who's bringing in millions of dollars to a firm says we want this, it's not a matter of price. It's a matter of how soon. And she can do whatever she wants to try to nickel and dime you, but if you push back, she's not going to be able to do much about it. So how much power do you think she really had?
I think she had power in terms of working with us and solidifying a deal that was good for both of our organizations. But she probably tipped her hands in the first week where she said, we really want to get this done for the gentleman that was ultimately our sponsor. We want to do this for him, for the team, because their team, if you think about it was a huge win not only for the organization and for the trading engineers, but it was a huge win for the team that actually provides those sophisticated pricing algorithms to the traders. And to make that even better in a time frame where the market was highly volatile around the world, it was just a great win for everybody. And it was just something that, you know, just being in sales for a long time, you get a gut very early on that this could be a very, very good opportunity based upon where the market is, based upon your product and what the product can do and where they were at as an organization.
So, okay, so picking up on that, that's interesting. Uh, your product has different value to different customers.
100%.
So a customer like a trading firm that's making millions and millions and millions of dollars, it has a lot more potential value and should therefore have a much higher price. To what degree are you aware of the bottom line impact of that 20% bump?
We tried to get that. We tried to, we said, would you like us to put together some, ROI, Nate, some of the old iceberg analyses that we used to do and all of that. But they're like, no, it's okay. We've got this. We're going to do this, which obviously told us that this was very, very favorable for them. And from our organization's perspective, we've got a couple of different ways to price this product. We've got one way to price it for organizations that are looking at cloud cost optimization and what that ultimate value is for them. And then for organizations where it's not cloud cost optimization, which is trading firms, we've got pricing based upon the quantity of vCores, server vCores that they need across their environment with our product. So different pricing based upon kind of that ultimate value that we provide. And, we work with a lot of trading organizations, but if you think about Netflix and you go out and you find a movie, That's Azul technology in the background. If you go out to a store and you swipe your MasterCard, it goes to the fraud detection organization, and that's our technology in the background. When you go out to a lot of the large e-commerce sites, a lot of the largest retailers around the world, when it comes to the shopping cart, when it comes to the customer experience programs, it's all our technology in the background. So different value, as you said, Rob, for different customers, but it all boils down to, you know, lower latency, better performance, cloud cost optimization, better results for e-commerce and for other types of businesses. So hopefully that gives you maybe just a little bit of a flavor for the product.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of salespeople who I don't think are fully on. They're so worried about having a price conversation that they don't position and protect the price that they offer. Because if I just helped you make $10 million and I only charge you 150,000, I got ripped off big time.
100%. And I think the biggest hurdle that we got over probably halfway through the sales cycle was, and this is just kind of my approach in a lot of deals, I like to give organizations 2 or 3 options, meaning because we're all based upon quantities. So I was able, and tiers or ranges of those quantities, and I was able to give them 3 tiers, but I kind of knew I knew where I wanted to land. And I didn't want to land at the small, and I knew we weren't going to land at kind of the unlimited quantity. We landed right in the middle, which is exactly where I had hopefully, positioned it for that success, and that's ultimately where we came to. I want to mention just kind of a deal that I'm working on now because you're talking about value. Working again with a procurement person, large, well-known organization in the insurance organization, hopefully, or industry. Hopefully, this will close within the next couple of weeks. But it's kind of funny because they continue to ask for more and more concessions, and we keep pushing back and saying, this is our best and final. And, yesterday, this is our best and final. Today, this is our best and final. We've given them a really great solution. We've given them a great overall, solution with everything that we can do, and we've bundled everything that we can do in it. So it's just now a matter of, trying to sell on value as opposed to price.
All right. So at this point, I want to invite everybody to tune in for part 2 because we're going to continue this conversation, really looking at Donna, talking to you about some of the things you might do differently earlier in your career. Because this first part has been hugely valuable, and I'm sure a lot of people watching did get a ton of value out of hearing some of the stories. And really, I always like to challenge people's thinking around the value versus price conversation because I was doing a training in the UK this week, and it came up again. It's every workshop. People are worried about it, and not everybody's got a good handle on it. So I love the way you talked about it. Thank you very much for that. And we'll be back shortly for part 2.